This episode is brought to you by Mubi. Sign up at the link in the description to get a whole month of great cinema for free. Here's a question for you. What was the highest grossing movie of 1988? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't a big budget blockbuster like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, or a franchise launching action classic like Die Hard. Nope. It was Rain Man. That's right. 35 years ago, the biggest movie around was an R-rated drama about an asshole and his autistic brother going on a road trip. It was a runaway box office hit, and then to top it all off, it swept the Academy Awards, winning Best Picture, Director, Actor, and Screenplay. Today, something like this seems impossible. If a movie like Rain Man even got greenlit today, it would be made for a fraction of the budget it had in the 80s, and would probably go straight to a streaming platform with a 1-week limited theatrical run to qualify for awards. There is almost a 0% chance it would become a mainstream hit. My point here is not that Rain Man is the best movie ever made. It is good though. It's that not very long ago, like within my lifetime, movies like this were the norm. Today, every major hit movie is a $200 million franchise installment aimed at 13-year-old boys, but a couple decades ago, right alongside those blockbusters were dramas and comedies aimed at different audiences, including adults, starring major movie stars. Rain Man used to be a totally normal mainstream movie, and now it seems like a relic of another era. Movies like this have become a dying breed. People have been predicting the death of cinema almost as long as the medium has existed. Like literally, here's an article from 1908 saying cinema is a fad that won't last. In 1951, legendary producer David O. Selznick predicted Hollywood was crumbling. In 1967, Roger Boussinot proclaimed cinema was dead. In the mid-90s, Susan Sontag's essay, The Decay of Cinema, bemoaned the dire state the movies were in. And in 2005, Jean-Luc Godard declared, cinema is over. Now, with all due respect to these people, who were all way smarter than I am, they were wrong. Honestly, they had no idea just how good they had it. Cinema wasn't dying in the 50s, and it wasn't dying in the 90s or the mid-2000s. It's dying right now, in the year of our Lord 2023. Right now, people are watching fewer movies than at any other point in the medium's history. It seems like the only movies people leave their homes to watch in a theater are giant budgeted franchise movies based on intellectual properties aimed at children. And lately, even those seem to be failing. At home, people half-watch movies while looking at their phones, and those movies are recommended to them by an algorithm and made because they resemble watered-down versions of better movies we liked when we were younger. Those movies are released on streaming platforms, an industry that also seems to be crumbling. Look, every single year, plenty of great movies get made, but fewer and fewer people each year are actually watching them. I'm not complaining that mainstream audiences aren't, like, rushing to see the new Apichatpong Weerasethakul movie or other dense, difficult art house fare. I'm talking about what used to be totally normal movies made for wide audiences. In 1979, the biggest movie of the year was Kramer vs. Kramer, a drama about a family going through a divorce. 40 years later, Marriage Story was released, an extremely similar movie with huge critical acclaim, also featuring big movie stars. But now, this is treated as a niche art house film, and it's watched by a fraction of the audience that watched Kramer vs. Kramer 40 years earlier. So what happened? How did we get here? Here's a clip of Trevor Noah on The Daily Show last year, complaining that the movies nominated for Oscars are the boring vegetables of movies that no one actually wants to watch.
It's because like the Oscars, it's never like shit that I've seen. They're never like, and the nominees are Transformers. Seen it? I'm just saying there's a disconnect clearly between like what we want to watch and what we should watch. It's like these movies are the vegetables of movies.
And look, I'm aware that theoretically he's a smart guy, but he sounds like a 12-year-old. The Oscar-nominated movies he's talking about are things like Licorice Pizza and West Side Story and King Richard. Those are not difficult art films. They are movies that pretty much anyone could enjoy. Has people's media literacy really become so bad that they are incapable of watching anything other than the same few franchises aimed at children and released by Disney? Also, for the record, Disney used to actually release original movies for adults under the banners Touchstone Pictures and Hollywood Pictures, both of which they shut down about 15 years ago. In addition to all this, it's also getting harder to watch older movies. Video rental stores no longer exist. Resources like Turner Classic Movies are being gutted because they're not deemed profitable enough. Disney's ever-expanding monopoly is refusing to allow repertory screenings of their movies, and now what also used to be Fox movies. And the physical media market continues to collapse, so if a movie isn't available to stream, sometimes that means it's not available to watch anywhere at all. Friends, I fear that our beloved cinema may be on its last legs. Emma, can we get some more dramatic lighting here? Perfect. Yes, it seems a murder is in the works. A slow poisoning of humanity's greatest art form, and someone or something is to blame. But who or what exactly? Well, that's why we're here today, to find out who the culprit is. My friends, today I invite you to join me in a coffin for the theatorium. On the wall behind me is a list of suspects, each with their own means and motivation for putting cinema in the grave. I've spent the past few weeks compiling the evidence, and now it's time to examine it. I shall present the case against each one of these foul figures one by one, and by the end of this episode, the killer's true identity will be as obvious as the mustache on my face. Emma, lock the doors. No one leaves until the killer is revealed.
This door doesn't actually lock. I think it's a fire code violation. Also, what's with the mustache?
Well, you know, like locked room mystery, list of suspects. Is the mustache too much?
It's hard to focus on anything else.
Fine.
Thank God.
All right, enough dilly-dallying. Our first suspect on the board is Marvel. And by extension, Hollywood's obsession with IP, but we're saying Marvel because it gets more attention this way. Now, I know they seem like an easy scapegoat. Since Marvel is the biggest, most popular thing in media and has been for like 15 years, they're often pointed to as the problem, the example of everything that's wrong with current cinema. Thanks to them, every studio became obsessed with producing endless interconnected cinematic universes, a web of never-ending franchises, killing original movies and dumbing down cinema forever. Or so they say. See, this thing that Marvel has come to embody, the safe, endless procession of big-budget franchise movies based on intellectual properties, actually began several years earlier, back at the turn of the millennium. In the 90s, there were, of course, movie franchises. Batman, Die Hard, various horror series, but the biggest movies of each year were very rarely sequels. They might be based on a book, like Jurassic Park, or an old TV show, like Mission Impossible, but these tended to be self-contained, standalone movies with no numbers in the titles. Then, in 1999, George Lucas debuted the Star Wars prequel trilogy, and while the films had a mixed critical reception, commercially, they were enormous successes, and they proved something to Hollywood, that there was a lot of money to be made in reviving well-known brands that had built-in audiences. Then in 2001, just a month apart, the Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings series debuted, both of which attempted what was a pretty new strategy. They set out to adapt multi-part series and, like Babe Ruth calling his shot, announced that they would do this across multiple movies. Unlike other franchises, these would be serialized, expecting that the audiences would watch each installment to keep up with the story. And the reason the studios felt secure making that commitment is that they were doing another thing that was relatively new: targeting massive pre-existing fan bases. While previous adaptations, like the Batman movies, played somewhat fast and loose with how they handled the source material, sometimes angering the loyal fans, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings put pleasing the fans as their top priority. If they could win them over, that meant potentially huge box office. Then the following year, a similar approach was applied to Spider-Man, and this was where the studios realized that when it came to intellectual properties, superhero comic books were potentially the most valuable of them all, because the comics these were based on were designed to run forever. There was a never-ending well of material to adapt. And that year, 2002, the 4 highest-grossing movies by a pretty enormous margin were Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Spider-Man, and Star Wars. In her book, Sleepless in Hollywood, which is about how the American film industry has changed in the 21st century, veteran producer Linda Obst explains that around this time, 3 components became essential for studios when greenlighting new movies. 1 was pre-awareness. The title had to be something that audiences had heard of before. 2, it must sell overseas, because recently the international box office, especially China, became such a massive market that could often generate the majority of a movie's profits. And 3, it should be able to generate a franchise or sequel. In the 80s and 90s, studios would usually have 1 or 2 of these big-budget tentpole movies per year, usually released in the summer or around Christmas. But now, since they'd figured out a safe formula, they could make way more of them. If they just invested heavily on an adaptation of a property with a built-in fan base, and if they got it right, they could have a franchise that could run for decades. It was like a hack for making billions of dollars.
Well, it's no trick to make a lot of money. All you want is to make a lot of money.
So why bother making an R-rated drama aimed at adults that might make a moderate profit when you could reboot Jurassic Park and have a franchise that'll run for at least another decade? To paraphrase a mid-budget movie that wouldn't get made today, $200 million isn't cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion. And this is what Marvel Studios ended up perfecting. Instead of just one franchise that released a new installment every 2 or 3 years, they had a collection of franchises that all connected into one mega franchise that released 3 movies every year. And since it was heavily serialized, essentially like a TV show that played in movie theaters, audiences felt the pressure to go see every one. And Marvel felt safe launching movies with lesser-known characters since everything was still a part of the larger franchise. Much of Marvel's success came not from the individual movies being amazing, but from how much excitement they were able to generate for what might happen in the next movie. Each movie, with its multiple mid- and post-credit scenes, also functioned as a trailer for the next one. Every studio wanted what Marvel had: a machine that could generate multiple movies per year, all with the same familiar branding. So Star Wars, instead of just releasing the regular main installments of the saga, started producing spin-off movies. Warner Brothers started a DC Comics movie universe, and after the Harry Potter series reached the end, launched a prequel series. Universal made a Fast and Furious spin-off, and infamously tried to reboot their monster characters into a shared cinematic universe, and Sony started producing interconnected movies about Spider-Man villains. More and more of the Hollywood release calendar became taken over by franchise blockbusters, with increasingly few of the normal movies, the dramas and comedies and non-sequels, getting made. If your average person might only see a handful of movies per year, now those movies were likely to only be $200 million franchise movies aimed at 14-year-old boys. Marvel in particular is extremely skilled at convincing audiences that they're getting a balanced cinematic diet. Their movies span different genres. Each one has a mix of comedy, drama, and action, and their excellent PR would tell us, this one is a political thriller, or this one is a teen comedy. But at the end of the day, they're all Marvel movies. They all look the same and feel the same and have the same formula of jokes, action, cameos, sequel teases, and climaxes with giant CGI things crashing out of the sky. And of course, because these properties are so valuable, the studios have become more and more hesitant about letting any artist have too much control and potentially make risky choices. So while at the beginning of this trend, they might hire horror movie weirdos like Sam Raimi or Peter Jackson, or let Alfonso Cuarón make a Harry Potter movie, they shifted toward hiring directors coming from TV or indie movies, who can slot into the existing machinery and not force too many of their own ideas. It's why the Russo brothers, with their successful track record of TV directing and serving the visions of various showrunners, turned out to be the perfect modern franchise filmmakers. They're not gonna force their vision because they don't really have a vision. And that's why this system worked. They delivered the same pretty good experience every time. It was like getting a grilled cheese at a diner. They were a safe bet for the audience and a safe bet for the studio. And so this is how you go from 1994, when the top 10 highest grossing movies contained one sequel, one TV reboot, and one indie comic book adaptation, but was mostly original movies aimed at a variety of audiences, to 2019, when the top 10 movies of the year are 3 Marvel movies, 2 Disney live-action remakes, 1 Star Wars movie, 2 Disney animated sequels, a sequel to the Jumanji reboot, and an adaptation of a DC comic. Another major component in this is the rise of the international market. In 2012, thanks to a deal made by then Vice President Joe Biden, China started allowing more American movies to be released there, and quickly became the second biggest market for films in the world. And one interesting fact is that for the additional American films that opened in China, they were required to be either in 3D or IMAX. And so, to take advantage of the potentially huge Chinese market, more blockbusters that could easily be converted to 3D or IMAX were produced. Now, right now, you might be arguing, hey, people like these movies. They're just getting made because people want to watch them. But, to quote a piece that Martin Scorsese wrote a few years ago where he addressed this very issue, if you're going to tell me that it's simply a matter of supply and demand and giving the people what they want, I'm going to disagree. It's a chicken and egg issue. If people are given only one kind of thing and endlessly sold only one kind of thing, of course they're going to want more of that one kind of thing. Audiences didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, we don't like movies like Rain Man or Sleepless in Seattle or Crimson Tide anymore. The studios trained them to only care about one kind of movie, to only go to see familiar things based on properties they already knew. That's right, the supply made the demand. And here's part of the issue. This strategy that has made the studios so many billions of dollars and pleased so many shareholders for the past 20 years, it might not be working as well as it used to. Many of these franchises seem to be running out of steam. Recent Marvel movies are making less than they were a few years ago. The new Transformers movie made less than half of what one of those movies made a decade ago. The Harry Potter prequel series seems to have petered out before even reaching its planned ending. For years, people would show up to any new superhero movie, and now 4 consecutive DC movies have underperformed. Even the return of Indiana Jones this year, in one of the most expensive movies ever made, which seemed like such a sure thing, was met with little excitement and is going to lose Disney $200 million. And now, here we are, after Hollywood spent 20 years conditioning audiences to only go to theaters for big franchise movies. But now that audience has kinda stopped caring about them. Back in 2013, Steven Spielberg, a guy often blamed with creating this type of movie, addressed the topic and said, there's going to be an implosion where 3 or 4 or maybe even half a dozen of these mega budgeted movies are going to go crashing into the ground. And that's going to change the paradigm again. So now my question is the new paradigm just the death of cinema altogether? Maybe. And that's my case against Marvel, and by extension, the rise of IP, but let's say Marvel because it gets more clicks.
So is Marvel the primary suspect here?
Patrick, I'm completely on board with a murder mystery themed episode, but can we please drop the mustache and the silly accent?
But Kenneth Branagh gets to do a silly accent.
Kenneth Branagh made Belfast, so he earned it. Did you make Belfast? Did you make a heartwarming, loosely autobiographical coming-of-age story about growing up during the Troubles?
No. Okay, where was I? Right. Is Marvel the killer? Well, in a way, they are the most obvious suspect, and in true murder mystery fashion, that would make them a classic red herring, the culprit that is purposefully misleading. It seems almost too simple, too easy to put the blame fully on Marvel's shoulders. But I will say, they did open the door to our next suspect. See, our next suspect is less a single entity and more a concept. Actually, it's a concept largely caused by our first suspect.
I don't think concepts can be charged with crimes.
But look, hear me out, because our second suspect here is the death of the movie star. Look, the fact is that even in the 20th century, long before intellectual properties took over Hollywood, audiences have always been drawn to what's familiar. It's safe and comforting, and they already know they like it. The perfect formula for a huge hit, whether in film or music, is to deliver something familiar in a new way. And so before everything became based on a comic book or video game or old TV show, there was a proven system for attracting audiences to familiar things. Movie stars. As long as there have been movies, there have been movie stars. In the silent era, there was Florence Lawrence and Mary Pickford, Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, and then as time went on, we got Clark Gable, Judy Garland, Jimmy Stewart, Gene Kelly, Audrey Hepburn, John Wayne, Paul Newman, Elizabeth Taylor, Denzel Washington. Look, you get the idea, you've heard of those people. These were actors that audiences liked. They were attractive, charismatic, and talented, and so people would go see a movie for them. To put it more crassly, each movie star was a brand. Before people would go see the new Marvel movie, they would go see the new Robert Redford movie, or the new Julia Roberts movie. In the 90s, you could have movies like these. 2.5-hour-long romantic comedy dramas where the poster is just the side of a guy's face. And those movies made hundreds of millions of dollars. They were some of the biggest movies of the year. No one knows who Jerry Maguire is. The tagline for this one is "Brace yourself for Melvin." Who the fuck is Melvin? Doesn't matter. Melvin's Jack Nicholson. These guys are goddamn movie stars, and so people went to see the movies for them. And then the 21st century arrived and the rise of the franchises began. And as the studios leaned more and more heavily on IP and characters pulled from existing source material, movie stars started mattering less and less. When Spider-Man was released in 2002, on the poster, there were no names above the title. They cast respected actors, but no one who would traditionally be called a star. No one who had ever headlined a blockbuster like this before. And this was when Hollywood realized that they didn't need them. The characters are the stars. People are showing up to see Spider-Man, and that mask covers his entire face. Doesn't really matter who's playing him. As Into the Spider-Verse would tell us years later,
anyone can wear the mask.
When Tobey Maguire is done, just replace him with Andrew Garfield. And then later replace him with Tom Holland. And then later replace him with, I don't know, Paul Giamatti. That'd be cool, right? Paul Giamatti Spider-Man? I'd watch it. Anyway, as Jake Uris recently wrote, the role of the movie star is reduced to providing the mere physical embodiment of a character for studios and parent companies who are solely concerned with acting as custodians of profitable intellectual property. I mean, it's bleak, but it's true. The problem here, and in some ways this is more a problem for the actors, is that none of the success of these movies is attributed to them. Like, sure, audiences might like them, but they're not really showing up for them. And so the actors have no value outside of those specific characters.
They like to say, oh, there's 100 stars out tonight. No, there's not. There's only 4 real stars, and the rest are just popular people, okay? Like Clint Eastwood's a star. That's a star, okay? Clint Eastwood is a star, okay? All right? Tobey Maguire's just a boy in tights, okay?
This clip is from 2005, and it is more accurate now than it was back then. Chris Evans had a breakout role as Captain America. People love him as that character. But they go to see those movies because they're Captain America movies, not Chris Evans movies. He's a good actor who is very handsome and very charming, and logically, he should be having a career similar to Tom Cruise in the 90s. Except that those movies aren't there anymore. So all he gets to do is appear in like streaming bullshit, like Ghosted, that basically doesn't exist. Evans' frequent co-star, Chris Hemsworth, tried to go the classic route. After Avengers, when he was on top of the world, he made a string of dramas, like classic 90s-style movie star movies, like Rush, In the Heart of the Sea, and Black Hat. And all of them flopped, because no matter how big the Thor movies are, they didn't make him a real movie star. Here's Anthony Mackie, another Marvel superhero actor, explaining the situation perfectly.
There are no movie stars anymore. Like Anthony Mackie isn't a movie star. The Falcon is a movie star. And that's what's weird. It used to be with Tom Cruise and Will Smith and Stallone and Schwarzenegger. When you went to the movies, you went to go see the Stallone movie. You went to go see the Schwarzenegger movie. Now you go see X-Men.
See, as studios started focusing on the home runs over the singles and doubles, as in giant budget blockbusters aiming to gross $1 billion, instead of the mid-budget movies aimed at generating a small but respectable profit, they unknowingly killed their system for developing new movie stars. Like, think back to the major movie stars that we know from the 80s and 90s. Tom Cruise, Denzel Washington, Tom Hanks, Julia Roberts, Brad Pitt, Sandra Bullock, Nicole Kidman, Keanu Reeves. And now think back to the movies that made them famous. None of these people became stars by playing superheroes. It was from starring in dramas and comedies and thrillers, like Big, Pretty Woman, Philadelphia, The Pelican Brief, Rain Man, Speed, Seven, To Die For. None of these movies had blockbuster-sized budgets, but they were all hits, and they all helped establish these stars as bankable commodities. Today, we think of Tom Cruise as maybe the biggest movie star in the world, but until Top Gun Maverick last year, he had never had a movie open to more than $100 million opening weekend. Outside of the Mission Impossible series, his career is mostly defined by successful dramas aimed at adults. The Color of Money, A Few Good Men, The Firm, Jerry Maguire, Magnolia, Vanilla Sky, Collateral, and these are the types of movies that almost never get made anymore. The reason we need movie stars like we used to have is that, on a purely commercial level, people pay money to see their movies, which means that, thanks to them, a wider variety of movies get made. Like, yeah, movies like Jerry Maguire and The Fugitive and Castaway are good, but people went to see them and they became huge hits because of the people starring in them. Erin Brockovich, an R-rated movie about a single mom doing paperwork, that, to be clear, is awesome, made $250 million, and that's because Julia Roberts is a movie star. Because of these stars, great filmmakers got decent budgets to make great movies, and that's the way movies have always worked. Earlier this year, National Research Group commissioned a survey asking people what actors would make them most want to go see a movie in a theater. Of the top 20 actors named, the youngest of them, coming in at number 20 on the list, is Chris Hemsworth, and he's 40 years old. Most of the actors are in their 50s or 60s. Some, such as Harrison Ford, are in their 80s. But the thing that's most clear looking at this list is how few new major movie stars, as in genuine box office draws, have come about in the last 25 years. Nearly every actor on this list became a star in the 80s or 90s. Only Dwayne Johnson, Kevin Hart, Ryan Reynolds, and Hemsworth became stars in the 21st century. After his breakout roles in two huge franchises, Harrison Ford really secured his stardom across the 80s and 90s by making mid-budget movies for adults, like Witness, Frantic, Working Girl, The Fugitive, or Patriot Games. But with those types of movies no longer around, all Hollywood has to offer Ford these days is returning to the same early roles that he first played nearly 50 years ago in legacy sequels to Star Wars, Blade Runner, and Indiana Jones. These movie stars are getting older, and they're not gonna be around forever. And those rare times that we do get an old-fashioned movie aimed at adults, like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, or The Lost City, or Ford versus Ferrari, it happens because of our few remaining stars that actually get people into the theater. But the idea of the movie star as we know it is nearly dead. And with it has gone real movies. And so that is the evidence against the death of the movie star. It's heavy stuff. But did death lead to death? A double indemnity, if you will.
Hey, I'm getting a little concerned about how much I'm hearing the word death in here.
Oh, hey Dave, we're just trying to figure out if the death of the movie star is responsible for killing cinema.
Well, I don't think a concept can be charged with a crime. Look, could you just cut it with the morbid stuff? I'm giving a tour to a new client, I don't want to spook him. Could you save this for a video about scary movies?
Wait, do you mean horror movies or literally the Scary Movie franchise?
Yes. Hey, no, I'm sorry, that's Patrick. He's a fucking weirdo.
Now, obviously, when there's an unsolved murder in the state of California, one name immediately jumps to the top of the suspect list. I realize that it's something of a cliche at this point, but we have to take a look at one of the most obvious suspects. I'm talking about one Mr. Roger Rabbit.
Of course. Wait, what?
Rising to fame in the early days of Toons, Roger was a cash cow for maroon cartoons. Shielded by the big studios and their deep, deep pockets, Roger must have felt untouchable. he could get anything he wanted. Money, power, cartoonishly exaggerated women. Soon, kicks were getting harder and harder to find. That left only one vice for this sadistic bunny. I'm talking about murder. Yes, there's a long history of Roger being connected to or suspected of unsolved murders in California. The Zodiac killings, the death of Natalie Wood, and I'm sure you remember my one foray into the true crime genre, the documentary Black Dahlia, White Rabbit.
I think this is verging on slander.
I know your game, Raven. Someday you'll slip up, and I'll be there. I'll be there.
Patrick, have you slept in the past few days?
Okay, I realize the evidence pointing to Roger Rabbit might be a little bit flimsy, but don't count him out. Those tunes are unpredictable. Now, so far, our suspects have been a little abstract. They've been major studios and business trends and ideas. We need a proper, living, breathing, gross and fleshy human suspect. Well, I've got our guy. Someone who looks like a true killer. I look into this guy's eyes and I question whether or not there's a soul in there. I'm talking about our next suspect, current Warner Brothers Discovery CEO, David Zaslav.
Didn't he get that job a couple of years ago? How did he kill cinema that quickly?
Okay, sure. He's only been in the job for 2 years, but in that time, he's already been called by GQ magazine perhaps the most hated man in Hollywood. I mean, look at that guy. Look at how he dresses. Look at his teeth. Look at the way his skin hangs on him like a man wearing the skin of someone he just recently de-skinned. If you ask me.
Patrick, I think we might be veering into slander again here.
All right, for legal purposes, I retract everything I just said. That was a joke, I do not really mean it. But look, even if Zaslav has not murdered any actual people, he has famously murdered movies. See, shortly after taking over Warner Brothers, he canceled and permanently shelved Batgirl and the animated film Scoob Holiday Haunt, both of which were nearly completed. He started the trend of deleting original movies and shows from streaming platforms, often making them unavailable to watch anywhere, and that has caught on in the industry, particularly with Disney. And we have to note that before he took over Warner Brothers, Zaslav had spent the previous 15 years overseeing Discovery's transition from educational programming to almost entirely trash reality TV like My Strange Addiction and Extreme Cougar Wives. Maybe the only good press Zaslav has received during his 2 years running the studio was earlier this year, when he appeared on stage with Steven Spielberg and Paul Thomas Anderson on a panel at the TCM Film Festival, where he spoke about how much he loves Turner Classic Movies. And then, 2 months later, Zaslav ordered TCM to cut their budget by 2/3, as 5 of the network's top executives were let go. Spielberg, Anderson, and Martin Scorsese had to step in and practically beg Zaslav to keep the network alive. When Zaslav took over the studio, he immediately tried to position himself as the reincarnation of a classic Hollywood mogul, a modern Jack Warner. Under his regime, the studio adopted a new slogan, "The stuff that dreams are made of," a quote from the Maltese Falcon. And most interestingly, he bought the house formerly owned by legendary Paramount studio chief Robert Evans. While Zaslav was going to great effort to imitate old school studio executives, all he was really doing was underlining how unlike them he is. So take someone like Evans, whose house Zaslav is currently living in, and whose skin Zaslav wishes he was wearing right now.
Please stop talking about wearing skin.
Look, you can say a lot of things about Robert Evans, like how he was arrested for cocaine trafficking and how he reportedly had a pretty depraved sex life. But one thing that everyone agrees on is that the guy really, truly cared about movies. While running Paramount, he greenlit and oversaw the productions of movies like Rosemary's Baby, Harold and Maude, The Italian Job, Chinatown, and most notably, The Godfather, on which he actually urged Francis Ford Coppola to make the movie longer so it would have more room to breathe. Obviously, he was still running a business and wanted to make a profit, but the guy cared about making great movies and wanted to make things that would have a place in film history. Evans was originally an actor, so he came from within the Hollywood system. That was the same path that Sherry Lansing took, who ran Paramount from 1992 until 2004. In a recent interview, John Woo shared an anecdote about making Face Off and said, "Before we started filming, Sherry Lansing, the chair of Paramount Pictures, had a meeting and gathered all of the producers and important people from the studio and said, 'All I want is a John Woo movie, and nobody needs to give him any notes.' I was so shocked and surprised. I got to have so much creative freedom." I'm not saying Hollywood back then was a utopia. It was always a crass, bottom-line driven business. But that is the kind of thing that it is impossible to imagine the head of a major studio saying now. Over time, there was a gradual change in the people running the studios. More and more often, they became people whose background was in business, not movies. And when the top people making decisions at a movie studio don't actually seem to care about movies, I think that's a problem. By the way, if you're wondering, David Zaslav was originally a lawyer and had never actually worked in the business of scripted entertainment until 2021. Bob Iger is often celebrated as the CEO who turned Disney around after it seemed to be slumping in the early 2000s during the final years of Michael Eisner's reign. Shortly after Iger took over, Disney was making billions of dollars from their movies alone every single year. But let's look at how he did that. He shut down Touchstone Pictures and Miramax, the in-house labels for releasing original movies usually aimed at older audiences. Movies like Signs, Pretty Woman, Good Morning Vietnam, Con Air, Shakespeare in Love, Jackie Brown, Gangs of New York, and The Life Aquatic, even National Treasure. So movies like that, Disney no longer cared about making those. Under Iger, Disney doubled down on brands. Pixar started producing way more sequels. They bought Marvel and Lucasfilm and demanded one Star Wars movie every year. And worst of all, they started their ongoing project of producing live-action remakes of all their classic animated movies, which has grossed billions of dollars and might also be the most creatively bankrupt endeavor I have seen in my lifetime. That endeavor has been spearheaded by Sean Bailey, president of Disney Studios Motion Picture Production since 2010. So if we're blaming people for our current situation, Sean Bailey, I think he's got to be near the top of the list. So while I'm sure Disney shareholders have been very happy, and they were obviously thrilled when Iger came out of retirement to take back the reins of the company from Bob Chapek, over the past 18 years or so, I think he has had a net negative effect on the medium of cinema. So him, Zaslav, all those guys, there's some strong evidence against them. Now, in case you didn't yet think I was a grumpy old man yelling at a cloud about how things were better in the old days, you will in a minute, because the next suspect on the board is TikTok. That's right. In a letter to their shareholders in July 2020, for the very first time, Netflix mentioned TikTok as a serious competitor, saying, quote, "TikTok's growth is astounding, showing the fluidity of internet entertainment." Now, to be clear, our suspect here isn't just TikTok. It's also YouTube and video games and basically any other entertainment on screens that people might be consuming instead of traditional media. After all, in 2018, Netflix said, "We compete with and lose to Fortnite more than HBO." Recent studies show that more than half of kids watch YouTube daily, and YouTuber has become one of the most popular dream jobs. I mean, how can a movie compare to a Mr. Beast video? But you know what? People are still going to the movies and watching movies at home on streaming platforms, so I'm not sure that short-form user-generated video is quite as big a threat as people make it out to be. Okay, so TikTok, You're off the hook for murder today, but I'll be watching you. I mean, not like watching. I don't use TikTok, but I'll be keeping an eye on what you're up to. My dear Emma, seems our growing list of suspects has become a bit unwieldy. Yes, under investigation today have been abstract conceptions of movie stardom, IP franchises, shitty social media platforms, and dastardly cartoon rabbits. Even our one human culprit, Monsieur Zaslav, has split into a multi-headed hydra. You would truly believe that this is the creme de la crime, that there couldn't be a more obvious culprit, but we have saved the worst for last, as they say. A suspect that cast a shroud of terror over this investigation, like a dark and mournful fog.
Patrick, I thought we agreed we weren't going to do the accent anymore.
But what would Poirot do?
Patrick, where do you keep getting mustaches from?
Oh, I bought them in bulk. I mean, you never know when you'll need a mustache. Plus, I've got a 2-year streak on French Duolingo, and I think that puts me in the same league as the greatest fictional Belgian detective ever created by an Englishwoman. Ow. But Emma, the mustache was the heart of the episode.
Can we just get to the last suspect?
So we now arrive at the final suspect in our case. Maybe the biggest one of all. Netflix. In the previous episode, we established that Netflix is largely responsible for bringing the idea of content to traditional media, of taking movies and TV and flattening them all into an endless sea of gray sludge they just dump more and more into every day. They release by far the most movies of any studio each year, from big-budget blockbusters to major Oscar contenders to a ton of low-budget horror movies you've never heard of. So what I'm saying is, they're obviously a suspect due to their size and their power and poor treatment of art, and also just the pretty obvious ways they have changed the industry for the worse. But something else is also true, and we have to acknowledge it. Netflix has made a lot of great movies. Actually, for many years, they were the place that would fund the expensive passion projects of great filmmakers that they couldn't get made anywhere else, like Martin Scorsese's The Irishman or Spike Lee's Da 5 Bloods. I mean, they even released Orson Welles' final film. They've given a home to David Fincher and Noah Baumbach, who have made all their recent projects there. They've produced movies like Roma, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, The Lost Daughter, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, Okja, The Power of the Dog. I'm thinking of ending things. I could go on. There's a lot of good movies there. And also, they funded one of the great pieces of 21st century art, the unauthorized Bash Brothers experience. So they definitely earned some points for that. So yeah, Netflix has brought a lot of good things into the world. But also, none of that matters if they turn out to be the one murdering cinema. So let's look at the evidence. Way before Netflix launched streaming video or started producing their own original programming, their first major achievement was killing video stores. Lest we forget, for years, Netflix's entire business was mail-order DVD rentals, which is actually finally coming to an end this very month. In 2000, Netflix actually asked Blockbuster, America's biggest video rental store chain, if they wanted to buy them out. Blockbuster turned them down, and 10 years later, Blockbuster went bankrupt. The death of video rental stores and how it has changed the way that people watch movies is a whole conversation on its own, but I thought it was at least worth mentioning. What's more important, though, is that in 2007, Netflix launched its streaming video service and quickly transformed cinema and the industry forever. Starting the following year, the DVD market began to nosedive, and over the next several years, it fell by more than 80%. Now here's a thing that's not discussed very much. For the major studios, DVDs and then Blu-rays were a major source of income. And it was easy, reliable income. The movies had already been made, so now they could essentially keep printing money forever as those titles continued to generate revenue through physical media sales. In the 2000s, these amounted to up to half of a studio's profits every year. For instance, in 2006, the DVD sales for the movie Walk the Line earned Fox an additional $120 million, which is nearly what that movie made in theaters. These additional profits are what allowed studios to take risks on non-IP movies, since they knew they would always have this money coming in. But then this revenue stream abruptly dried up. The studios were desperate to keep profits up, so they leaned increasingly heavily on the safe bets, the giant tentpole movies that were sure to bring in enormous box office. Look, I spend too much money buying Blu-rays and 4Ks and all that stuff, but a handful of weirdos like me can't keep this market afloat. Look, here's Matt Damon explaining this whole thing while eating hot wings.
The DVD was a huge part of our business, of our revenue stream, and technology has just made that obsolete. And so the movies that we used to make, you could afford to not make all of your money when it played in the theater because you knew you had the DVD coming behind the release. And 6 months later, you'd get a whole nother chunk. It would be like reopening the movie almost. And when that went away, that changed the type of movies that we could make. That's suddenly a massive gamble in a way that it wasn't in the 1990s when they were making all those kind of movies, the kind of movies that I loved and the kind of movies that were my bread and butter.
But Netflix's impact goes much further than simply killing the DVD market. See, while this was happening, they also kind of broke the entire industry. In 2013, when Netflix launched their own original programming, starting with House of Cards, they revolutionized the way that television works. Now, there was no more waiting for a show to air on TV at a specific time. There was no more waiting a week for the next episode. Nope, now the entire season was just there, on your TV, our computer, our phone, instantly. This was huge. Everyone was signing up, everyone was excited about it, and Netflix, funded by a whole lot of VC money, started spending billions of dollars on original movies and shows. As their stock prices skyrocketed, suddenly every other studio had to get in on the action. And so in the following years, we got Disney+, HBO Max, Paramount+, Peacock, and I always forget that MGM Plus is also a thing. Everyone was spending billions of dollars on new media to fill these new platforms. Now with streaming, old TV was dead. Movie theaters for anything other than blockbusters, dead. But there were a few problems. Let's start with the financial part. In the past year, it has started to become clear that economically, the streaming system is kind of broken. It turns out that just because stock prices are going up doesn't mean a company is actually profitable. So even though these companies are spending billions of dollars on streaming and they're getting millions of subscribers, many of them are still losing billions of dollars. Like, did you know that Paramount Plus spent $200 million on a Halo TV show? Do you know anyone that actually watched that show? Of course not. But that's how things go in the streaming era. Companies are just throwing money away. Look, the thing about the old system for TV that started in like the 50s is that it made sense and it worked. Shows aired on TV and they had commercial breaks. The more popular a show was, the more it would cost money to air commercials during it, so the more money the show would make. With movies, the more people that go see it, the more tickets it sells, and the more money it makes. You release another movie, that also makes money. But with streaming, it's a subscription model. So when you spend $200 million to make The Gray Man, it is very unlikely that you're going to get 13 million new people subscribing just to watch that movie and cover the costs. Here's a fun experiment. Let's look at what, today, are Netflix's top 10 most watched movies. More than half of those movies are not original Netflix productions. They were made by other studios, released in theaters, and then later on, licensed by Netflix. So why is Netflix spending billions of dollars on huge original productions when many of their most popular movies are ones that they didn't even make? As Steven Soderbergh recently put it, It's absolutely conceivable that the streaming subscription model is the crypto of the entertainment business. I can't believe what I'm about to say, but the guy who finally woke up and realized that spending a ton of money to make stuff just for streaming is a bad idea was David Zaslav. God damn it, am I actually about to praise Zaslav for something? He's one of our suspects. I hate this. Look, to be clear, Zaslav went about this in maybe the worst way possible by canceling movies that had already been filmed and pulling various original shows and movies off of HBO Max. But some shows that had originally been produced for streaming, like My Adventures with Superman, they decided to actually air on regular TV, with commercial breaks. Or other shows they licensed to other platforms who would pay them to air it. Again, much like traditional TV worked. But beyond just the stupid economics of it, streaming also changed how audiences viewed movies. We discussed at length in the previous episode how Netflix led the charge of turning everything into content, producing overwhelming amounts of media and throwing it all into a giant pile where everything is treated the same. Whether it's the new Coen Brothers movie or the show Sexy Beasts, the reality dating show where contestants wear prosthetic monster makeup. Everything has been devalued, everything is treated exactly the same, and Netflix can't be bothered to actually promote individual movies because they produce such an overwhelming amount that it's all just content. So they just promote Netflix and hope that you find something on there. And what this has done is make streaming movies culturally less important than those released in theaters. According to the Nielsen streaming charts for 2022, movies that were released in theaters before going to streaming had more than double the viewership of movies that were released straight to streaming. And here's another interesting chart. It's the top 25 movies of 2022 by Wikipedia page views. The straight-to-streaming movies, like Netflix's The Gray Man or The Adam Project, had a fraction of the page views as a theatrical release. I know it seems funny to measure and compare Wikipedia views, but honestly, it's a pretty solid way of gauging general audience interest in a movie. And that's the biggest difference between a theatrical release and a streaming release. Theatrical movies tend to have much larger marketing campaigns, and the audience is conditioned to think that they matter more than the movies that just show up on their TV. No matter how much money Netflix spends on The Gray Man, it will always have less value to us than a movie released in theaters. And what doesn't help is just how much fucking stuff Netflix makes. In 2022, they made just about as many movies as all the other studios combined. The quantity is astounding. The quality, not so much. According to Rotten Tomatoes, Netflix movies have the lowest average combined quality score of any major streamer or studio in Hollywood. So the cultural perception is that their movies are simply worse. So while nearly every major studio was following Netflix's lead and launching their own streaming service, investing heavily in movies and TV for streaming, sometimes they ended up hurting themselves. For years, Pixar produced some of the most reliably successful movies in the world. An original movie, like Inside Out, would make nearly $1 billion. And then, during the pandemic, Disney started releasing Pixar movies onto Disney+, since they were obsessed with keeping subscriber numbers up. Even after movie theaters reopened, the Pixar movies Luca and Turning Red went straight to streaming. And so, Disney trained audiences to look at Pixar movies as now just the movies you watched at home. They were no longer as important as they used to be. And over the past year, as Pixar movies have gone back into theaters, they've been making way less than they used to. To use some gross corporate lingo, streaming killed the value of the Pixar brand. Okay, I want to talk about Ted Sarandos for a minute. For the past 23 years, he has been Netflix's chief content officer, and now current co-CEO. Sarandos is an interesting figure, and one thing that separates him from some other studio heads is that the man genuinely seems to love movies, and he actually cares about and knows about the history of the medium and the industry. While other execs are focused on exploiting the various properties they own, Sarandos talks excitedly about working with the best filmmakers in the world and giving them creative control. Sarandos grew up in a poor household, but with a family that really loved movies, and they made sure to always have an HBO subscription. But since his father was a heavy smoker who couldn't go 2 hours without a cigarette, the family very rarely went to the movie theater, and instead watched everything at home. Starting as a teenager, Sarandos spent years working at video stores and prided himself on developing an encyclopedic knowledge of movies so he could recommend something to suit every customer's tastes. And so Sarandos never developed any real fondness for the theatrical experience. And right here, we have another example of how our experiences condition us. Ted's family never went to the movie theater, so Ted only ever watched movies at home, and now that he's in charge of a major studio, his priority is just people watching movies at home.
The notion of being in a movie theater seat at 8 o'clock makes almost no sense to a guy like you and your lifestyle.
So let's once again bring back that Scorsese quote. If people are given only one kind of thing and endlessly sold only one kind of thing, of course, they're going to want more of that one kind of thing. This is what Netflix and the streaming platforms that came after have been doing to audiences. They've been conditioning them to watch movies differently. Now, movies are not a thing you make any kind of commitment to watch. They're not something you have to leave your house for. They just come to you. Okay, I want to talk about movie theaters because I think they're important. And I realize that that can be a somewhat controversial view. Some people say it's elitist since it costs money to go to the theater, and most areas have far fewer options than, say, I do here in New York. And people have all their complaints about movie theaters, rude audiences, poor projection, etc. And the thing is, those complaints aren't really new. They've been issues for 100 years. The only newer development is people using their phones in theaters, which I do believe you should go to jail for. Just for like a week, but enough to teach you a lesson. Anyway, while I think a packed, respectful audience can definitely enhance the experience, especially with a comedy, that isn't what I think is most important about theaters. I think it's two things. One, the scale. Seeing a movie on a screen bigger than you are, where a close-up makes an actor's head 15 feet tall, and the sound is louder and clearer than it would ever be at home, it makes the movie bigger than you are, and it demands your attention. And unless you're an asshole, you have your phone turned off, so you have been forced to get rid of any distractions. And two, the lack of control. At home, you decide when to start the movie. You might hit pause and go wash the dishes or take a phone call. But in a theater, you have to show up on time. You have to leave your house and travel somewhere. The movie is not going to stop for you. It will start on time and carry on until it's over. You are surrendering yourself to the movie, operating on its schedule and letting it take control. So in other words, this makes the movie something important that you conform your schedule to, not a thing you throw on for a few minutes, then pause and come back to the next day. As for why Netflix is one of our top suspects here, a crucial piece of evidence appeared last November. In 2021, Netflix secured a deal for the 2 sequels to Rian Johnson's breakout hit, Knives Out, the exceedingly rare modern case of an original mid-budget movie that became a huge commercial success. For years, Netflix has avoided theatrical releases as much as possible. None of their movies will play in AMC or Regal theaters, the biggest chains in North America, because the studio refuses to have a window of time between a theatrical release and a streaming release. They'll only put their more prestigious movies like Roma or Marriage Story in a small handful of theaters for a week or two, just so as to meet the requirements to qualify for awards. And they never bother to promote those releases because they're not a priority. But the Knives Out sequel, Glass Onion, was an exception. For the first time, Netflix agreed to give it a wider than usual theatrical release a full month before it went to streaming. And this time, it even played in AMC theaters. Something Johnson said, "I fought my ass off to get Netflix to agree to." And it was a huge success. Despite playing in only 600 theaters, about 1/6 as many as the other new movies that week, it still reached number 3 at the box office, making $15 million in 1 week. And then Netflix just pulled it from theaters. Reed Hastings, co-founder and chairman of Netflix, admitted that they left a lot of money on the table by not letting it play in theaters longer. After all, Knives Out had made over $300 million in theaters, nearly 8 times its budget. So what company in their right mind would give up potentially making that much money? It's not like $300 million worth of new subscribers were gonna sign up for Netflix just to watch this movie. Well, I thought about this for a while, and there's only one explanation that makes sense to me. See, while Netflix would have made a lot of money from giving Glass Onion a proper theatrical release, the other entity who would also benefit is movie theaters. To Netflix, theaters are the one true competition, their real enemy. Not other streaming platforms, movie theaters. And so, they decided to give up this money to prevent movie theaters from getting a win. Because they're playing the long game. Their ultimate goal is to put movie theaters out of business the way they did with video stores, until Netflix is the only place people can watch movies. Also, in that same interview, Reed Hastings called Elon Musk the bravest, most creative person on the planet. So clearly, the guy has some bad takes. Okay, so the evidence against Netflix. They've devalued movies and turned them into content. They started a streaming gold rush that broke the industry and seems to be collapsing. And they are actively working to kill movie theaters. If you ask me, that's very suspicious. So there you have it. We've presented the evidence against each one of our major suspects, but still, I cannot seem to deduce which one of them has the blood of cinema on their hands. Which one? Which ones? Yes, of course, such a fiendish plot was far too much for any one suspect alone. Even a concept like the death of the movie star couldn't take on this task by themselves. Quite simply put, the guilty party is all of them. They've all been working together, a sinister conspiracy, a deadly spider's web of conspiratorial conspiring. They've all been working together for years, in the shadows, plotting the demise of the world's most beloved art form. Or is this too a ruse, another red herring? Is that what the real perpetrator wants me to believe, to cover their own tracks? Could it be that the real perpetrator is someone so obvious, someone I missed this entire time, someone right under my nose? Emma, it's you. You're the one who's been killing cinema.
What? No.
Yeah. Never mind, actually, that doesn't make sense. Would have been cool though, you know, like a pretty good twist. Was you all along? But no, for real, I'm pretty sure it is all of them working together. Okay, so here's how I think it went down. It started with this new breed of studio heads, valuing profits over everything else, finding a new way to scale up their box office earnings, and in the process, they killed off movie stars. And all the while, Netflix was lurking, quietly killing off video stores with their eyes set next on the DVD market. When it killed that off, seemingly hurting the major studios by eliminating one of its revenue streams, they joined up and kicked off the boom of streaming platforms. And now—
What about Roger Rabbit?
Oh, him. I mean, as much as it pains me to say it, I guess he's innocent once again. Fine, I'll take that stupid rabbit bastard off the board. One day you'll slip up, and I'll be there when it happens. But the one thing at the root of all of this, the idea that has driven nearly every decision made by every person and entity involved here, other than, of course, pure greed and capitalism, is the elimination of risk. Here's what our good buddy Martin Scorsese had to say about that. Many films today are perfect products manufactured for immediate consumption. Many of them are well made by teams of talented individuals. All the same, they lack something essential to cinema: the unifying vision of an individual artist. Because, of course, the individual artist is the riskiest factor of all. I'm certainly not implying that movies should be a subsidized art form or that they ever were. When the Hollywood studio system was still alive and well, the tension between the artists and the people who ran the business was constant and intense, but it was a productive tension that gave us some of the greatest films ever made. The movie business, and yes, I am well aware that the word business is right there, is and has always been a dumb one. It's about making art and selling stories and trying to figure out what and who millions of people will have emotional reactions to. It is inherently unpredictable, which is why countless times before, when companies like Coca-Cola or AT&T decide to buy a movie studio, they inevitably sell it a few years later out of frustration because the movie business doesn't work like the ones they're used to. In the 21st century, a bunch of studio executives thought they'd cracked it and figured out a nearly mathematical system for making huge profits. As the podcast Action for Everyone put it, movies got moneyballed. They did their best to eliminate the human element. They relied on brands, not actors or filmmakers. They built a system where they could pretty much command the audience to show up a handful of times per year, and it worked. Streaming seemed like a gold mine that would generate infinite money. It was such a perfect system that if a movie failed, the executives who greenlit it couldn't be blamed because, hey, they were just following the formula. And then, inevitably, it turned out that their new system didn't work as well as we all thought. They trained audiences to only watch one kind of movie, and over time, the audience grew tired of it. They went back to their well of beloved properties so many times that it finally started to run dry. They stopped caring about movie stars who could reliably make hits out of movies with respectable budgets, and they forgot to cultivate a new stable of them. And streaming eventually revealed itself to make way less money than anyone thought, and mostly it just conditioned audiences to stay home and stop spending money at the movie theater. And so here we are. In a world where, thanks to a whole bunch of men in suits who saw a way to make billions of dollars, they've just about run an industry into the ground. And looking at next year's slate of movies, I gotta say, I don't think Kraven the Hunter or a new animated Garfield movie are gonna be the ones to save it. Garfield, as we all know, is famously very lazy. So Emma, is that it? Is that where we leave things?
Forget it, Patrick. It's Tinseltown.
All right. Let's go. Wait a second. We can't end it here. This is a stone cold bummer. This isn't satisfying. Emma, I believe that we can give this murder story a happy ending. I wish I had my mustache on me, but guess I'll have to solve this case bare-lipped. No. Look, this murder hasn't happened yet. There's still time to turn things around. So now, I'm gonna be a mix of Samantha Morton and Tom Cruise in Minority Report. Precog and murder stopping guy. So there must be some way to save cinema, right? Look, I realize how arrogant this seems. I don't actually work in the film industry. I don't have a degree in business or economics. Who am I to tell people how to save an industry and an art form? Well, to paraphrase a hit mid-budget movie that wouldn't get made today, I'm just a boy standing in front of a camera, asking people on the internet to keep watching, and then to sign up for Mubi with the link in the description. Okay, the situation here is that I've collected a ton of research and looked at how several trends have developed over the past 20 years or so. And now we are confronted with three main goals. One, how do we get studios to actually make, good, real movies again? Two, how do we get people to watch them? And 3, how do we do this in a way where the studios stay in business and keep making money? So here are my ideas for how to, if not save cinema, then at least get it to a more healthy place. Idea number 1. Stop making stuff exclusively for streaming. Look, with streaming, you're kind of just throwing money away. I know Netflix will never listen to this, so it's mostly for the other studios, Disney, Warner, Paramount, Universal. Just use your streaming platforms as a library for what you've already released. Have your movies go to streaming after their theatrical release. Just use streaming as passive income to make up for what used to be DVD sales. Okay, here's my big crazy thought about streaming. Disney never should have spent all those billions of dollars making all that stuff, Marvel and Star Wars shows and Pixar movies, just to put on Disney+. Are you aware that back in May, Disney released a live-action Peter Pan movie from the director of The Green Knight starring Jude Law? No, because they just dumped it on streaming and flushed that money down the drain. But the thing is, Disney has their entire library of classic animated movies, some of the most popular movies ever made. And if all they had done was make Disney Plus a place to watch those whenever you want, then basically every parent in the world would be required to subscribe just to keep their kids happy. I mean, I would gladly spend $8 a month on Disney Plus just to have a place to watch The Simpsons. That's all you need to do. The thing prints money on its own. Like, millions of people are constantly rewatching The Office. They'll pay for Peacock just for that. Okay, idea number 2. Learn the right lessons from Barbie and Oppenheimer. Let me tell you the wrong lessons. The wrong lessons are that people want more movies based on toys, and that dramas are only successful if they're directed by Christopher Nolan. No, sorry, that's not it. Barbie was a hit because it was Greta Gerwig's Barbie, because the studio took a risk and gave an interesting filmmaker a lot of control over this property, and she had a vision that audiences got excited about. Oppenheimer is a bleak 3-hour R-rated movie that is mostly about people talking in rooms, and so far it has made almost $1 billion. That is insane. And this is also the result of a singular filmmaker making the movie they wanted to make. The main lesson here is that audiences genuinely do want to see something new. They're tired of Flashes and Transformerses, and they want new stories. They have a broader appetite than they've been given credit for these past 20 years. What matters is how the movies are marketed. The studios sold them as events, and not just because they opened on the same day. These movies were new and different and interesting, and the narrative was that you had to see them. Really, you had to see them both if you wanted to be a part of the cultural conversation. I'm not saying stop making comic book movies, just that maybe more of them should take a Barbie approach and let an exciting, established filmmaker with a unique take make them. And then get out of their way instead of forcing them to make their movie connect to like 5 other movies. Honestly, the success of Oppenheimer has had me wondering if Tar, another recent long, thorny drama, could have been a blockbuster if it had been released in the summer and marketed differently. I mean, probably not, but maybe. Like, if Oppenheimer had been made by any other filmmaker, it would have been released in December and sold as a highbrow award season movie that wasn't for general audiences. But because Christopher Nolan demands his movies release in July, a movie that bears zero resemblance to every other blockbuster in recent memory became a major summer movie that made more money than the last couple Marvel movies. Despite what the studios have believed for years, audiences aren't stupid, and they'll watch good movies under the right circumstances. Okay, idea number 3. Stop spending so much money on movies. Oppenheimer and Barbie cost about $100 million each. That isn't cheap, but look at it this way. The new Indiana Jones cost $290 million. The Flash and Transformers Rise of the Beasts cost $200 million each. Why? The conventional studio wisdom for years has been if you fill a movie with wall-to-wall CGI, it will make more money. But clearly that isn't true anymore. The biggest hits of the year cost half of what those other movies did. So maybe stop throwing away hundreds of millions of dollars on movies people aren't even excited for and spend it, like, smarter. For the cost of that Transformers movie, you could make 5 smaller movies, which means 5 extra shots and making a hit. Which leads me to my next idea, maybe the most important one here. Number 4, retrain audiences to go see more movies. From what I've seen, the best analysis of the state of the American film industry and what to do about it came last fall from James Gray, director of movies like Armageddon Time and The Lost City of Zed. Here's a clip.
Here's what happened. When you make movies that only make a ton of money and they're only one kind of movie, you begin to get a large segment of the population out of the habit of going to the movies. And then you begin to eliminate the importance of movies culturally. And the Academy Awards, they know it.
Yeah.
They sit around and they say, why is the viewership? Why is it going down? Yeah. It's going down because we did not make the investment in the broad-based engagement with the product. I know, maybe a movie that was made, well, you know, Ang Lee movie Ice Storm, maybe that didn't make $1 billion, but you know what? It maintained broad-based interest.
Exactly.
So we've got to force it back. And you know what? The studios should be willing to lose money for a couple of years on art film divisions. And in the end, they will be happier because it'll come back. That's what I think.
I've talked a lot in this episode about how audiences are trained and conditioned, how there are subtextual messages from the decisions the studio makes that inform the behavior of the audience over time. What Gray is saying here is that over the past 20 years or so, the studios, by doubling down on one kind of movie and so relentlessly selling that one kind of movie, they trained audiences to only see that one kind of movie. And they got them out of the habit of just casually going to the movies. So what Gray proposes is that the industry needs to retrain the audience. Be willing to take a bit of a loss for a few years by reinvesting in the type of movies that they stopped making. Dramas, movies for adults, movies that actually aspire to be classics like the ones from the 70s, 80s, and 90s that we all miss. Give audiences a variety of options again. Tell them you can go to the movies for something other than the 5th installment in a series of $200 million movies based on a cartoon. That a movie can actually be exciting and make you feel something other than wondering what the post-credits scene means for what will happen in the next one. Remind audiences that movies are about risks, and it's okay to take a chance on a movie where you don't already know exactly what it's going to be. Okay, idea number 5, make comedies again. This is pretty self-explanatory. Just please make comedy movies again and actually put them in theaters. And I don't mean action comedies or superhero movies that have some jokes, like just regular comedies. This year, everyone was obsessively looking at No Hard Feelings, the Jennifer Lawrence movie, putting the entire weight of the future of theatrical comedy movies on its shoulder. And I liked that movie, but that is way too much pressure for one film. Look, comedies do not cost a lot of money to make, and they have the potential to make a lot of money. So just make more. It's a small investment and can pay off in a huge way. And look, I just miss sitting in a crowded theater with everyone losing their minds at a really funny movie. Bring that back. All right, and so now my final idea for saving cinema, and this is a big one. Number 6, invest in making new movie stars. We've already established here why movie stars matter, so let's get some goddamn new ones. People already like the various Chris's from the Marvel movies and stuff, but we're giving them nothing to do. Evans is stuck in miserable streaming shit like Ghosted, in a role that should have been played by like Jason Segel. And next year he's in a Christmas action movie for Amazon with The Rock. Come on, our dude is suffering here. Give him a Jerry Maguire or a No Way Out. Put the man in a legal drama. Look, the previous couple generations of stars are getting older. Tom Cruise can't carry us forever. Okay, maybe he can, but he could use some help. These people are essential to the industry and the art form. They get movies made, so we need to take those popular people and make them into actual stars. So make some movies where like an older established star teams up with a younger one. Pass the torch. Think about the future. Look, the thing is, American cinema has been in a similar place before. By the late 1960s, audiences had grown tired of overblown big-budget studio movies like Dr. Dolittle, and so culture shifted. A new breed of smaller movies made by younger, innovative, independent artists arrived, led by Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, and Easy Rider, and audiences went nuts for them, and they ushered in this new golden age for American filmmaking. Now, I'm not saying that that's about to happen to us, but hey, Oppenheimer is still selling out theaters 2 months after it opened. Anything could happen. The movies aren't quite dead just yet, so there's still hope. In that Martin Scorsese piece that I've referenced several times, he talks a lot about algorithms versus curation. So much of our viewing these days is determined by algorithms studying data to give us more movies that resemble, usually just in terms of genre, stuff we've already seen. But I think what's becoming more important than ever, especially in this era of rapidly evolving AI, is human curation. Like, I would argue that much of the fandom around A24 mostly comes down to their good taste in selecting and curating a great library of movies. And a platform that I think is doing this particularly well, that I'm a really big fan of, is Mubi, our sponsor on this episode. I talked a lot here about streaming services just dumping endless low-quality movies into an ocean of content, but Mubi is not doing that. Mubi is actually curated by people who know and love movies, who handpick this incredible variety so you might actually see really cool new stuff that you wouldn't discover otherwise. Like, they'll have collections based around directors. Right now they have a whole Pedro Almodovar collection. So look, if you want to see sexy young Antonio Banderas, this is the collection for you. In there, they also have like Voltaire and Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, you know, a bunch of classics. Mubi also has their exclusive releases, like one of their latest, The Five Devils, which I just watched the other day and I really liked. It's a French drama involving queer romance and witchcraft, sort of, and kind of time travel. Look, I don't want to spoil it, but the movie's really cool and I think you should check it out. Of course, they have Park Chan-wook's latest movie, Decision to Leave, which came out late last year. If you've been following the recent Blank Check series, you gotta see that. And they also have Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance and Lady Vengeance. Look, this is my favorite part of Mubi ad reads because I just get to look at the site and list cool things that they have. Speaking of Korean movies, they have The Man from Nowhere, which is an awesome South Korean action movie. They have some early David Cronenberg, like Shivers. Okay, I have not seen this one, but I want to. They have Antonioni's movie, The Passenger, from the mid-70s starring Jack Nicholson, which looks wild. They have Peter Bogdanovich's The Last Picture Show, a masterpiece, obviously. Paul Verhoeven's Black Book, Hal Ashby's Shampoo with Warren Beatty, which is so good. Okay, they've got Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone. They've got Satoshi Kon's Paprika, a bunch of Dario Argento, like Deep Red and Opera. Look, I could do this all day, but the point is that Mubi is what I think a streaming service should be. A great curated library of movies where you'll actually find exciting new things to watch. And right now, you can get 30 days totally free to try it out and see if you like it by clicking the link in the description or going to mubi.com/Patrick H. Willems. So look, if you watched this whole episode, if you're still here now, then theoretically, you are interested in cinema. So I'm pretty sure you'll like Mubi a lot. So go check it out. That's it. Yes, my friends, cinema may be down, but it's not out yet. It seems today that though the scales of justice remain unbalanced, there's still some hope to be found in the darkness. Although I must confess, a certain air of uneasiness still sits in my heart. A sense that in all of this, something has slipped through my fingers. A key suspect or suspects who remain unearthed.